Hey, it's great. It's great to have the chance to have this little conversation with you, particularly on a topic that means a lot to me personally, but also to the whole National Geographic learning philosophy, which is how to integrate values into the practice of English language teaching with young learners and teens. Hello, everyone. It's fantastic to have the opportunity to exchange these ideas with people from all over the world. Very good friends, as I can see from the attendees list, and also people that I'm already looking forward to meet in person sometime soon. So, again, the main topic of our gathering today has to do with um, getting a firm, solid understanding on what values are and what sort of values we feel are um, the best to include to weave through the pedagogy of English in young learners and teens. So we're going to get started, first of all, trying to set some sort of a common ground, common understanding on the concept of values. And I started researching on this topic a while ago, and I found this definition of the concept of values on just a regular dictionary that I truly liked. So this idea of values being a person's principles or standards of behavior, it's quite interesting to me. So trying to find the links between what we do as language teachers and the concept of values, trying to find points of intersection, if you may, between the concept of values being a person's principles or standards of behavior, or what you use, the sort of knowledge that you use for making judgments of what's important in life, captured my attention and you know got me thinking into what's the importance of using such principles, such standards, such aspects of values and judgment development into what we do as language teachers, right? Um, so I kept on looking for even stronger, deeper definitions of the concept of values, and I came across this definition on a portal that it's specialized on values practice that's called Ethics Age. And you see um, the quote here that says, values are basic and fundamental beliefs that guide or motivate attitudes or actions. They help us to determine what is important to us. Values describe the personal qualities we choose to embody to guide our actions, the sort of person we want to be, the manner in which we treat ourselves and others, and our interaction with the world around us. They provide the general guidelines for conduct. So this concept of values actually made or resonated a lot with our philosophy and our vision at National Geographic Learning and as English language teaching practitioners, particularly the bit that reads the way we interact with the world around us. And I think that is the one reason why I became an advocate of the idea of implementing values into English language teaching and learning. Because at the end, the main and most important purpose of an English language class should be getting students to communicate in English with the world around them, right? And so, exactly. And it's not only the world around them, but as Julian's very well pointed out here, the world within us as well, with that intrapersonal sort of notion or intelligence. And for that, for being able to communicate with ourselves first and with the people and the context around us, you do need to have a solid core set of values. And so the idea, the proposal that I'm gonna present to you today has to do with integrating those two notions. The practice of English language teaching as a tool for communication with the world around you, including a core set of values that helps you, having a very proficient and successful communication or build proficient and communication bridges with yourself and the people around you. Okay? Very good. So By the way, if at any point during our gathering you have any sort of questions and comments, use the chat as you're already doing, and I'll do my best to catch up with all of your questions and comments and try to point them out during my presentation. But anyways, so we feel that this definition of values being basic and fundamental beliefs that guide or motivate attitudes and actions has a lot to do with the practice of English language teaching with young learners and teens. Considering that values are overall the motive behind purposeful action, the way through which we specify a relationship between a person and a goal, and the idea that values are essential to ethics. That is, through the practice of values, you get a purpose for doing something. Through the practice of values, you understand the world around you. You have the possibility of developing sensitivity and respect about whatever the action or whatever the situation is developing around you. And you also have the possibility of specifying, creating goals to be reached, right? Exactly. Simonette is saying, like us teachers, we have a code of ethics. Absolutely. There's values that we teachers pursue and portray in every class. So that is the idea that we try to pass on to students, that through the practice of English, they can also develop a code of ethics, a culture of ethics that would help them use English more successfully, more proficiently in this global village that we live in right now. Very good. And yeah, we do have cross-cultural misunderstandings, but the more familiar you are with your code of ethics, the more open you are to the understanding of your own values and other people's values, you actually get to, go through such misunderstanding in a much more successful way, I believe. Right? Very good. So, talking specifically about the idea of values and the school environment, not only our general code of ethics for life, but in specific values and the school environment, I strongly believe that since students spend a majority of their time at school, it should be a place that supports families and communities' efforts to establish strong values in students. The truth is that teachers are tasked with the job of helping children see that values are not only an important part of the educational process, but also to their overall development as an individual. So I think that not only English language teaching, but in general, all core subjects and all the activities that happen in school should include a practice on values. Such code of ethics, such practice of values should definitely come from home first. But it is our duty as educators to strengthen the values that are coming from home. And if there is a case that such values were not even presented to kids at home, then it is our duty to start making children aware of the existence of such values at school. I absolutely understand. We do have to promote what they bring from home, but it's been the case is that what they bring for home is practically, zero at some point. Sad but true. So we have the chance, we have this golden opportunity through English language teaching to present the model not only of behavior but of ethics as we practice the most global and most widely used language for communication in this planet. So just to present you with a very interesting action case that I researched recently of the integration of values and the educational process. This is the code of ethics that is presented to primary school level kids at an elementary school in Luton, the United Kingdom. So whenever a new kid comes to class, or for every single student at the beginning of a new school year, this ethos or code of ethic, it's presented to kids. And as you can see on the slide right now, this is nothing but a list of core general values that kids have to first learn to understand and then put into practice through the school year. So when students come to class first day of the school year, they don't have to deal at the very beginning with any core subject matter. What they do first is they get familiar with the ethos of the school. This code of ethics, if you know, in which they learn to appreciate the idea of being understanding and cooperative and appreciative and responsible through the school year. So before having to deal with the core content of this of whatever the subject, it could be math, history, English, or physics. Before they do that, they get familiar with the code of ethics that they have to put into practice at school throughout the school year. And hopefully, since they're getting familiar with this code of ethics for school practice, they will take this knowledge to whatever happens outside of the school as well. So in a way, school is supporting the development, not only the academic development of those kids, but they're also helping them become better human beings and better citizens of this world, right? So this is the code of ethics they present, and this is how they use it throughout the year. So kids at the beginning are presented with the code of ethics, and then they have a calendar that they can actually pursue and put into practice throughout the year. And since they know that this idea of making kids aware and solid practitioners of values won't happen overnight, they develop a 2-year-long plan in which they go through the same code of ethics twice over that period of time. And so every month has a value to concentrate on in the practice of whatever the activity is at school. So, for example, in September, they're going to focus on respect. And then the upcoming September, it's going to be kindness. In October, they're going to practice the idea of honesty, and they're going to practice the idea of peace in the upcoming September. So all the readings, all the videos, all the activities they do curricularly and extracurricularly, they have to have a taste of the value and focus for that specific month. How do you like this idea? I see in the chat that overall you think this is a good idea. Very good. Fantastic. And so it's not only for kids, but they also involve parents and the school community. I'm sorry, maybe the print here, it's not that big for you to read, but you can go to their website. I've asked for permission to quote them, so you can go to their website and get a look at what they do. But anyways, they have this very interesting message to parents and the general community that says, at Bramridge, we teach children values. Values are aspirational attributes and attitudes. These can be nurtured to help people discover the very best of themselves, which enables them to be good citizens and prepare them for the life of work. It equips pupils with social skills that help them cooperate and relate to others effectively. It provides them with the self-esteem and confidence to explore and develop their full potential. And they have aims. They have specific objectives to reach throughout the implementation of this program. The first one is improve behavior and relationships. So throughout the practice of these values, they try to move away from bullying and behavioral problems at school. Develop pupils' understanding of values and their importance. Encourage children to model values both in and out of school. As I mentioned before, they start within the school, but ideally Kids will take such values home, and maybe they will teach parents and family about the importance of putting such values into practice. Also an objective is to promote values through the curriculum. So it's not just an isolated sort of a practice, but it's embedded through whatever the curricula you're teaching, including English. Promote values by being good adult role models for teachers and parents. Promote values through colorful, engaging displays. And encourage parents to support the program through the website, newsletters, and values workshops, right? So this is the sort of aims that they pursue with the implementation of their values program. And in this next slide, they have practical ideas to implement throughout the 2 school years period that I mentioned before. So for example, they say, our values education program consists of 2 sets of 11 values covered over a 2-year period. The program then repeats itself. Each month, a new value is introduced through values lessons in each class. This value then forms a 4-week cycle of introducing the value, links to growth mindset, links to British values, in this case because of the geographical location of the school, and then an area of topical interest, for example, safety. Further understanding of the value in the context of the school and the wider community is developed through assemblies. Our offset noted assemblies are as good opportunities for pupils to consider important values such as respect and resilience. And finally, children and staff values role models are chosen. And then, and if you visited the website, there's a link for you to see people that have been named as role models for values, and you can see what they've done and the sort of activities they put into practice. So I'm presenting this to you just as a very well put together idea on how to integrate a solid values programs into the practice of teaching in general and within a school community. So I see through the chat that this idea is considered to be a good one by most of you, which is fantastic. And so what we're going to do now, and of course when you get the opportunity to see either the recording or the PDF of this presentation, you can just follow the link to get even more familiar with what happens at this school that I'm using as some sort of a case study for our gathering today. And so this is on the general sort of like concept, what we could do in order to start integrating values programs throughout a solid school environment. Now, talking about specifically the integration of values in our classrooms as English language teachers, these are some of the ideas that I've collected from teachers all over Latin America. I guess I didn't mention this but at the beginning, but I'm based in Mexico, and I have the opportunity to work for National Geographic Learning, traveling throughout Latin America, observing classes, analyzing curricula, and providing teacher training to National Geographic users and potential users throughout the continent. I've been doing this for the last 15 years, and I've had the opportunity to collect a lot of information on the importance of values being integrated into the practice of teaching in general and the practice of teaching English to young learners and teens. So my conclusion on this idea is, why are values so important in ELT? Number one is the role of English as a true global language, or the lingua franca of our times nowadays, right? English is no longer the language that children need for communicating with a native English speaker, with, let's say, an American or a British person or a person from Australia exclusively, as it was in the past, right? English is nowadays the most global, the most widely used language in this planet, and 2/3 of the total number of users of English in this world are non-native speakers. And exactly, there's more non-native speakers than native speakers now, and that's 3 to 1 as we speak. And there's predictions that it's going to be 5-1 by year 2025. So it is important for children to understand that English is used globally, that through English they can access the world and everything in it. And with that in mind, they have to understand that every time a non-native speaker, and a native speaker as well at some point, but every time a non-native speaker uses English as a second or foreign language, they're using also cultural links that they have to their own local language and their own local culture. So there is a need for children to develop that sort of understanding, that sort of tolerance and respect throughout the endless possibilities of cultural implications of English as a lingua franca, right? So there's the idea also that through the inclusion of values in an English language program, students will learn to appreciate diversity. They can establish activities through which they can compare and contrast how the world lives and develops further in this, rather convulsing time that we're living in right now. Through the practice of values in the English language spectrum, children can learn to appreciate cultural differences and similarities. So they get to understand and fully believe that English is no longer just a boring set of irregular verbs to learn or memorize in irregular past. And instead of that, they get to understand that through English, they can build bridges of communication, and they can start developing an understanding and appreciation of what's happening around the world, and not only at English-speaking or Anglophone countries, right? Very good. So that is the reason why at National Geographic Learning we're so much into this idea of helping kids develop values throughout the practice of English. Because right now, at this time in which we live in this global village in which there are no boundaries for intercommunication, English by itself won't do the trick. You need to put English and values into practice together in order for children to fully understand how to use it proficiently for global communication. Because right now, the practice of communication in English includes, by nature, a cultural understanding and a cultural sensitivity, right? So, good. So this is the reason why we feel values are so important in ELT, and I like the way you're putting it, Nancy. English and values equals global communication. Absolutely, I totally agree with you. Thanks for that. So, question for you, and you can use the chat for this. We have, of course, a set program to teach, particularly when we're teaching children, particularly young children. We have a set of topics to cover as part of our program. Typically, such topics include toys, animals, food, family, clothes, etc. Right? So these are the typical topics we tend to teach when we're teaching young children. My question to you would be, what sort of values you think are related to these topics? For example, if you're teaching a unit on toys, or if you're teaching a unit on animals, what sort of values you think are important to present and link those topics with? Okay, very good. So for example, you're saying that for family, maybe we could talk about respect. For animals, we can also talk about respect. Very good. Fantastic. For toys, we can talk about the value of sharing, the value of keeping them clean. Love that. Very good. For clothes, appreciation, being neat. For family, we can talk about commitment. This is fantastic. For food, we can talk about healthy food, eating healthy. Great. For clothes, we can talk about, I like that. For clothes, we can talk about respect and tolerance. Love it. Very good. Fantastic. The idea of sharing for toys, perhaps. So let me just show you some ideas that we have for integrating values and, typical topics that we get to teach on regular basis to young children. And let's begin with the idea of toys. If we're talking about, teaching vocabulary for children to name toys, how about on that same practice include some ideas on sharing, as you pretty well pointed out before. So the idea is that for kids, when they're practicing their vocabulary, when they're practicing their listening, reading, writing activities for developing knowledge about the lexis of the concept of toys, they can learn to share their toys. And this is for very young children's first grade, if you may, 6, 7-year-old kids. And we ask them to think, pair, and share. What toys do you share with your friends? Why do you select such toys and not others? What makes your toys so valuable that you don't want to share them, etc., etc. And through that awareness, we are not only practicing the language, but at the same time, we're practicing a value, the value of sharing, right? Another example. Let's say, for example, you're teaching the concept of food. So there's a full unit on learning the vocabulary of food, and if you're teaching older kids, so maybe there's a grammar component to it. But how about enriching the practice of such language with eating good food? So it is important for kids to understand the value of eating good food for developing a healthy lifestyle. So the values is eat good food, eat fruits and vegetables daily, drink enough water, and there's a little activity if you see here. What do you eat and drink to stay healthy? So with that simple question, we make them think critically about their eating habits, and we have them not only practice the language, but at the same time become aware of the importance of developing that value further. And this is something that I truly love, because typically when we think about values, we think of a more generic and I would say moral set of values. We think of honesty, and we think of friendship, and we think of respect, which are all extremely important. But at the same time, we gotta allow for our kids to witness more practical values, if you know what I mean. So this idea of eating good food, it's a very practical value that they can totally relate to, and it is at some point much more tangible and easy for them to decode and understand. And I agree, the visual, the picture makes it even more appealing and more interesting. Very good. Okay. How about clothes? Right? Take care of your clothes. And so the idea is, yeah, through the unit, through the practice of English, they're going to learn to, name items of clothing. They're going to talk about what sort of language to use for buying clothes, etc., etc. But at the same time, they learn to practice a value that has to do with taking good care of their clothes, particularly when they're young children. They're not aware of this idea and ask me about it. I have a 5-year-old kid who actually doesn't pay much respect to the clothes he wears. And this is work in progress for me, right? So I got to make my kid understand that he has to take good care of his clothes. So imagine that you can develop not only the language, but also this idea, this value of taking good care of your clothes while you practice the language in a classroom and outside of the classroom, right? You respect people's property, fantastic, very good. You take a look at the actual item of clothing and the benefits you get from wearing it rather than the label, very good, fantastic. Animals. Be good to animals. So you have the unit in which you learn to name animals. Could be farm animals, domestic animals, wild animals. But within that unit, exactly, you think about the possibilities for caring about animals, nurturing animals, preserving animals. Overall, the idea is be good to animals. So give your pet food and water. That's the practicality of the value that we're putting into practice. So it's not just some sort of an ethereal concept or notion, but you have an activity to do in order to develop that value further. So the value in itself is be good to animals. The practical idea is give your pet food and water, which is pretty much at the level of a young learner. This is something that a young learner can do, right? And from that simple action, they're going to not only practice the language, but they're also going to become aware of the importance of values in and out of school. Practical ideas, absolutely, Daniela, I agree with you. One more example, family. So there's always a unit in which we teach our kids vocabulary for naming members of their family. Together with that instruction, we can maybe talk about the value of loving your family or working and playing together, right? Family values are important. I agree with you. Very good. And so I have more examples that for time constraints I'm not going to point out today, but I'll give you at the end of the session my Facebook profile in order to keep on discussing this if you're interested. But let's just go into this idea of what values should I include in my English language teaching lessons. You were already talking about some of such values through the chat. There's the value of generosity. There's the value of dialogue, respect among family members, gratitude. Very good. Tolerance. Fantastic. Empathy. Respect. Humility. Creativity. Caring. Security. Yes. So according to my research and the opportunities that I've had of observing hundreds of classrooms, these are typically the values that are worth including initially. I'm not saying that these are the only values that we should include in our English language teaching programs, but initially and for making students familiar and aware with the importance of values, I would recommend to start working on initially the value of tolerance, acceptance, inclusion, friendship, respect, which are all, general code core of what I call moral values. But at the same time, I would also include a set of values that have a more tangible and immediate effect on kids' everyday lives. Like, for example, tidiness. Let's talk about the importance of keeping their surroundings clean, keeping their desk clean, keeping their school clean, keeping their room clean. It's extremely important. Compliance. Yeah, you have homework, you have work to do at school. Become responsible and comply with such work. Responsibility, care for the environment, resilience, etc., etc., etc. I agree. Punctuality. Good. And Christine, I totally agree with you. Sounds good, but teenagers and clean rooms are some sort of an oxymoron. Totally. Remember, right now we're being concentrated on young learners. We're just about to jump into the sort of core values to present to teenagers, which are a different sort of a different sort of animal, if you know what I mean, when it comes to the idea of developing such notions. But yeah, absolutely. So yeah, just to give you examples, how to take those sort of like ethereal set of values into more practical activities when teaching young learners. So for example, this is an activity that we've designed for helping kids develop the value of making friends. Of course, there's other labels for this practice. It could be tolerance, inclusion, respect, but trying to make the value as tangible as possible for young learners, we decided to go with more practical names, like the name of making friends, right? And we present them with a story, and we give them practical activities to first analyze the story and also create something around that story to help them develop the value further. Diana is asking about the idea of resilience. Well, practically what I thought of when I included this is for kids to understand that they are at some point entitled to make mistakes, but that a mistake, an error, a bad grade, a bad day at school shouldn't take the stamina or the desire to keep learning away from them, right? So the idea of resilience has to do with no matter how bad your day was or how low your grade was on any given activity, you should keep on trying and giving your best. And at some point, you're going to get over that problem and you're going to continue learning, right? That's my notion of exactly not giving up, giving your best at all times. Absolutely. Great, fantastic. So another example. Another value has to do with helping others. And notice how it is extremely important to present the notion, to present the value as tangibly and visually as possible to young kids. Because if you just told them about the value, a couple of kids will get it. The rest would be a bit lost because it's difficult for them, particularly in their concrete way of thinking. It would be difficult for them to fully understand the grasp and outreach of the value. But if you present them with a visual, magic would happen, right? So you, at the same time you're practicing the language, you are introducing a value, in this case helping others. And similar to what we saw before, there's activities to do in order to focus them on the analysis of the value through the visual, and then a production. So they draw a picture and they make this some sort of a personal matter. So it's not only what's in the book, it's something that I've created myself now, right? Very good. So so far, we've talked about the importance of implementing those values in young learners programs. We've seen a very good example of that school in Luton, the United Kingdom. We've analyzed the set of core set of values that I feel should be introduced to young learners. And we've seen some practical examples on how to introduce those values practice with children. Now, let's talk for a second about teenagers. I've been reading through the chat that you're pretty much in agreement with all these ideas, but at some point you always mention, yeah, this is fantastic, but how about teens? Because teens won't go for this. Because teens, you need to have a different sort of focus for them. And I agree with you, teenagers are great. They're fantastic. But we need to be smart enough to understand that they don't want to use the same sort of activities and examples that children use because they see themselves as grown-ups. Am I right? So let's try to find and let's try to discuss for a minute the implications of implementing values programs on teens values codes. Sorry, on teens programs. So let's begin by presenting a little poll for you. I have a question that I would like you to take a look at and then answer. So a teacher's ability to understand and respond to students' feelings is called sympathy, rapport, empathy, or trust. How do you call the teacher's ability to understand and respond to students' feelings? Okay. Very good. Fantastic. Great. So it's empathy, and you're absolutely right. So when you're trying to work on a values program for teenagers, the first thing you have to take into account is empathy. It's your ability as teachers, as educators, to understand what they're going through and to understand that being a teenager is not easy at all. That being a teenager, it's rather the most traumatic stage in life when it comes to biochemical changes, psychological challenges, etc., etc. There's very interesting research by Besmer and Kress in the US that claims that the only other stage in which human bodies undergo as traumatic transformations as the ones they experience in adolescence, it's the pre-birth stage, the fetal stage, in which there's floods of hormones and biochemical components moving up and down your body. So you're either a fetus or you're a teenager. Those are the only two stages in life that can be compared when it comes to, again, the biochemical imbalances, the hormonal imbalances, and the massive growth and development of your body. Teenagers have a lot in their heads to think about. And according to Erickson, there is, I don't know if you're familiar with this chart, and we can discuss this further through a blog perhaps, or through my social media, but I want to concentrate you on this idea of kids at the age of 13 to 19, kids developing some sort of a social crisis because they go through role confusion, and they ask themselves, who am I and what can I be in life? I know by heart, they think, I know by heart I'm no longer a kid, right? My surroundings keep on telling me, my parents, my teachers, my friends keep on telling me I'm no longer a kid. My body is telling me I'm no longer a kid, but I'm no longer an adult. I'm not entitled with the rights and obligations of an adult. So what am I? What can I be? That's the existential question that teenagers ask for themselves throughout the planet. This is the one thing that identifies teenagers all over the globe. That question, who am I? What can I be? And this is what keeps their minds busy when you're trying to teach them the present progressive, right? They don't pay much attention to the actual practice of the language because their minds are busy trying to figure out who they are and what they can be. That is the importance of values, of including values for teenagers when learning at school, and particularly when learning English, right? So through the practice of English, through the practice of values in English, they can find some ideas on how to answer such questions, right? So just to give you an idea, this is Erickson again. The search for identity is described by Erickson as life's fifth psychological conflict, identity versus diffusion or role confusion. It is about the need that adolescents have to determine who they are, their own identity. It is about their challenge to become responsible and independent adults. Generally, they do this by questioning the customs, beliefs, and values imposed on them by adults so they can break free from these restraints and choose for themselves. So they don't wanna keep on following the values that were imposed by adults. You name teachers, parents, schools, institutions. They don't care about that anymore. They are in the process of developing their own set of values and beliefs, but they need models. Otherwise, it becomes a rather risky and dangerous practice. So our idea is, yeah, they ask many questions, as Carmen Cecilia is noting in the chat. They do ask many questions because they are in search for identity. They want to get models. So our idea is, for first of all, through that empathy that we discussed before, we got to understand that children are in that search for identity. They want to know who they are. And because of that, it is only normal that they tend to move away from the adult figure and get closer to peers. So they're going to question everything that was previously presented and at some point imposed by adults, right? They're going to question that by nature. And they're going to tend to get closer to their friends, their peers, their classmates. So they look for role models. And yeah, they go through this sort of like existential crisis. They become sensitive. It is easy for them to feel hurt. In fact, I have yet another question for you, another poll that I would like to check your answers on. And this one reads, which statement best describes adolescents? Adolescents are aggressive towards adults. Adolescents are trying to figure out who they are. Adolescents are openly dependent on their parents, or adolescents are self-confident. What do you think? Okay. So overall, they're trying to figure out who they are. Absolutely. They're trying to figure out who they are, and we gotta take that into consideration when we select what to teach and how to teach it to teens. That is the importance of values in a teens program. We have to present them with a solid set of values that would help them answer the question, who am I? What can I be? So the English practice becomes even more important for teens because through that notion, they can not only develop the language further, but they can also get help, get aid on not being isolated, as Dilcia is mentioning in the chat, and also find good, solid role models that they can follow in order to become better, at the beginning, better adolescents, and ultimately solid, good, proficient human beings. So just to give you an idea, for adolescents, our idea is that they should be presented with values that are tangible, but that don't feel imposed, if you know what I mean. And we have to be very careful on selecting the right role models to present. Our proposal has to do with using the work of National Geographic explorers in order to practice the language further, help them develop a core set of values, a solid set of values, and at the same time use the National Geographic explorers as role models in order to find answers to the existential question that it's marking the stage they're going through, right? So they're influenced by celebrities. I absolutely agree. Why not presenting them with an alternative? So it's not only celebrities that are worth following, it's also National Geographic explorers and the work they've done for the benefit of mankind that are worth following and that are worth becoming aware of. So these are just some examples of the set of values that we've incorporated to the practice of English language teaching. As Emily is noting in the chat, they all come from a series, a National Geographic learning series for teaching teenagers that's called Impact. So, for example, we're portraying this set of National Geographic explorers, including Guillermo de Anda, Daniel Rave Ellison, or Andres Russo. If you notice, there's also the possibility of motivating them even subconsciously, if you know what I mean, because we're not just presenting them with the role model that it's typically portrayed through English language textbooks, which is the Anglophone, that it's the ideal. But in this case, it's National Geographic explorers, is people that have advocated to work for the benefit of mankind, and people that come from many different ethnical backgrounds, many different economic backgrounds, and many different endeavors, right? So Julian's mentioning something. You're absolutely right, Julian. I was not sensitive enough, and I think I only included men. But if you go through the pages of our books, you're going to realize that there's a very nice balance between female and male explorers. Thank you. Thanks for noticing that up, Julian. Thank you. Exactly. So as you're mentioning in the chat, we are presenting them with examples from all over the globe. So there's so many different dimensions that we're trying to cover through this practice. It's the role model factor, the diversity factor, and also the idea that for using English successfully, you don't have to pretend to be a native speaker. You just have to develop your values and your ideas in order to create messages and build communicative bridges in a proficient, solid way. Very good. Fantastic. So since my time is almost up, I want to present you with a little video about a National Geographic explorer that we're using on one of our books that's called Impact, again, a book for teaching English to teenagers with a solid values program. So I'm gonna play this little video for you. Tell me if you can actually hear it and see it without too much of a problem. And once the video is done, we're gonna discuss further. Okay, so very good. There you have it.
My education came from observing what was happening around me and observing that richness that comes with struggle. I was always looking for a way to translate what I was seeing around me, and photography became my voice in this big, very confusing world. And that was the beginning. I think adventure is anything that puts us outside our comfort zone. In my world, that has always been going into the mountains. In 2010, 2011, I went to Pakistan to climb in the Himalaya in winter. We did the first ascent of Gasherbrum 2, an 8,000 meter peak in the Karakoram Himalaya. And that trip changed my life forever. On the descent, we were hit by an avalanche that nearly killed all three of us. When I realized that I had not died, I turned a camera on myself and took an image, and that image ended up being put on the cover of National Geographic. There was no way of knowing at the time that that image that was really just my way of dealing with stress was gonna push my life in such a dramatic direction towards telling that larger story of what it means to hurt and what it means to triumph and what it means to be human. I've never been comfortable in the place that I'm in. I can't stop and sit. It's a constant engine that just keeps driving me towards the things that are unknown to me. It doesn't matter if I can't feel my fingers. It doesn't matter how my face stings and literally feels like it's getting sandblasted. What matters is that somebody else can feel that by looking at a picture. I've been to all 7 continents. I've witnessed sunrise over the highest mountains in the world. Polar bears standing on the last piece of ice on the farthest north piece of land in the Eurasian continent. And faces, I've seen faces that are just years and years of history, all wrapped into one single expression. The most important tool for connecting with anybody that you're photographing is being able to make somebody laugh.
You're not that much older.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just given that moment, all of a sudden you have a friend for life. And the whole world opens up. My job is to communicate a real, raw, visceral experience. And despite the seriousness of all of this, and despite the fact that we are facing massive problems as a human family, we're still experiencing each other and loving and having a ton of fun. I mean, life is fun. This started as a way for me to communicate what I was experiencing. And what it's become is a way for me to communicate what we are.
Okay. So apologies if you couldn't hear or see the video. We're including this video on the recording of this talk, so you're gonna have a chance to take a look at it and even download it for your own use. And yeah, I think this is a very profound message. Imagine presenting your teenagers with videos like this that portray the work of a National Geographic photographer in this case, but that it's automatically linked to a number of values, right? The value of resilience, the value of perseverance, the value of tolerance, the value of inclusion. And yeah, the idea that at the end we're all one big family and we can get to communicate with those sort of like relatives, if you may, through English, the value of determination and hard working, courage, etc. That is the set of ideas that I feel we should present to teenagers. If you notice, the approach, it's sort of like different. The sort of activities that we had for presenting values to young learners are far more practical, but for teenagers, and the idea of not imposing them a core set of values, but rather inspire them to become aware of such values and at the same time answer their own existential question. I think that is a recipe for success. So thank you very much. I agree with you. And just as a way to sum this up, I think that without values, children have no sense of purpose and clarity. Not to mention their ability to think clear and straight will be distorted. By fostering an environment where core values are a focal point, it enables students to logically grapple with life and encourages healthy brain development and growth. Hence the importance of including values practice on the art of teaching English to young learners and teens. Thank you very much for your comments and for your participation in this talk. If you have any further questions, you can catch me through email or through my Facebook profile, which is what you have on screen right now. I'll be more than happy to continue presenting and discussing and getting your ideas back on the concept of values practice in English language teaching. And yeah, I hope to see you anytime soon. Thank you very much, and thank you for your very kind comments in the chat. By the way, a lot of you were asking about the examples, the videos, and the activities that I used in my presentation. They all come from National Geographic series. The Young Learners bit, I took some examples and some ideas from the brand new series Look and the second edition of our bestseller Our World. And for the teens examples, I use pages of Impact, all from National Geographic Learning. So thank you very much for your participation and your attention and your kind remarks, and hope to hear from you very soon.
Right.
Thank
you
you
so much,
Emily?
Jair. Thank you everyone for joining us here today. We're so glad you could be a part of this webinar, and we really hope you found this useful for your classroom to help inspire bringing values into the ELT classroom. I'm just going to put the link to a survey that you'll all be directed to now. We'd love to hear your feedback, again, so we can help bring more useful webinars to you. As just a few last notes as we wrap up here, we will be sending you a certificate of attendance. That will come in about a week. We will be sending also the slides and the recording of this session as well in that email. And they'll all be downloadable links. The slides and recording will also be available on our webinar website, so you can view them at any time. The website is eltngl.com/younglearner webinars, and you can also find it under our teen webinar tab too. So thanks again all for joining. If you did like this webinar here today, we do have several more coming up for teaching adults actually. We have a few left in the season, and you can register on our website there. And then we do have a blog for teachers of English. Jair will be writing a blog post too to accompany the webinar, so stay tuned for that. And then we'd love for you to connect with us on our social channels. So we are on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. and we have accounts both globally and regionally too, depending on where you are. So thanks everyone again, and thank you, Jair. I'm going to send you all to the feedback survey now. And I do see some questions about certificates in the past, you can always email ngl.webinars@cengage.com if you have any questions about that, and we'll get it to you. All right, thanks everyone.